Okay, and we're on our last lecture here, going through ancient Greece. Um, you can divide up the ancient Greek art periods into 4 different periods: geometric, archaic, classical, Hellenistic. We'll really be spending our time on archaic, classical, and Hellenistic. But I'll show you just a couple pieces of geometric. They're like this, where they're using geometric shapes and not really a whole lot of developed imagery of people. Although later we do see some like this that's very simplified representations of people and horses, but it's all done with very geometric designs. But let's go into archaic. Now here on this hallmark slide, I want to emphasize to you that I'm going over these because on your exam, the final exam, one section will be comprehensive and it will be me showing you slides of artwork that has not been shown to you in the book or in these lectures. And you need to find out, figure out what art period those fit into. You need to look at the hallmarks and the clues of those pieces. I will not put a piece up there that is not obvious. I'll put it that way. To the trained eye, someone who's done some study, has paid attention to this, you should be able instantly to figure out where that goes. Okay, so here with archaic, the human body with these attributes really show that it is in the archaic period. Archaic being somewhat, an older type of development, but a stiff pose, the archaic grin, which it's hard to understand that now, but I'll show it to you in a second. Simplified anatomy, the knotted braids of the hair, and then the almond-shaped eyes. Okay, and here's a representation of it from around 600. Okay, the female figure here is around 650, 625. We get into this period where, because of the culture of the Greek city-states, there was more freedom for the artists to create whatever they wanted versus the artists in Egypt, which, because it was linked with their religion, the art did not develop. You had no freedom to create anything outside of the standard. But here, there was a lot more freedom, a lot more artistry, and an artist at this shop would do something to develop something, and another artist down the street would see that and develop something more. So a competition got going. And we start to see this here, even in the archaic period. If you look at this Koros, which is a male figure, this is actually a gravestone, grave marker for a warrior. It's very stiff. The eyes are almond-shaped, the knotted hair, the simplified anatomy. And if you look at it too, it's very connected to the ancient Egyptian statues with the rigid pose and the very simplified anatomy. There was some export and import of art and artists between those two cultures. And if you look on the map, they're very close. So that does make sense. Okay. The male figure is the Koros. That's the type. The type for the female is Kore, which is normally a goddess figure. And then just a few years later, 70 years or so, the artists have developed what almost looks real, but it's not. It still has archaic grin. It still has the knotted hair, the almond-shaped eyes, and that rigid pose. So it still is coming a little bit closer to reality, but still not quite. Now on this piece, this is Kroisos, we know that that is the name of the person, the warrior that was killed, who this grave marker represents. Okay, we can't see it here, but on a piece of this, it was actually chiseled in the person's name. Okay, now talking about Greek columns, Greek temples, we won't go in depth into that, but one thing to remember, this might come up on the test, is these parts of a temple. The column, the capital, which is the head of the column, and then from that point above, that is called the entablature. From the very top down to the top of the columns. That's entablature. And then this very wide triangle shape is called the pediment. Now, that's important because if you go around your campus, although I haven't been there, or you go around neighborhoods, you will see that design. And sometimes you'll even see a house that has columns, white columns that are thick, or thin white columns, and then a pediment over their front door or on the side of their house. And that represents something. That goes all the way back to ancient Greece, those design elements. Okay, so just these very few things I want you to understand. Okay, now talking about the columns, 3 columns that I want you to understand and know. The Doric, which is the very simple, round, almost like a pancake capital, and then Ionic, which has these volutes, which are curlicue designs. Some people call it the toothpaste tube that's being squished out or rolled up. And then Corinthian, which is very ornate. However you need to remember this. Doric is very simple. It only has a few syllables. Ionic, a little bit more. Corinthian, a little bit more. So the more syllables, the more ornate. That's one way to understand it, one way to memorize it. There are lots more that I could go over, but we're not going to here. Just those 3. Now, talking about temples, here's a temple that has this scene on this pediment inside that triangle. And this is an archaic temple. And we can tell because of the artwork on it that this this warrior, even though he's dying, he has a spear stuck into his chest. He's still smiling. That's the archaic grin. He still has almond eyes. He has knotted hair and somewhat of a rigid design of his body, but there's a lot more realism here. Muscles are stretched. There's gravity pulling down on muscles. It's just that style trumps any innovation in the design work. Okay? Here's another one from the other end of the temple. Same thing. He's dying. There's the grin. There's the eyes. Somewhat rigid pose, but still a little bit more realistic. Then we get into this part, which is classical. Please understand that these art periods build on top of one another, and no one gets up in the morning and says, hey, let's have the classical period. They just don't do that. It is this natural flow of one artist doing one thing and another artist doing another to try to make things better and more realistic. Okay? So in classical is where we see a lot of innovation in a short amount of period of time. So the hallmarks of classical is a relaxed pose, the contrapposto, which is an Italian word for the contrasting pose, implied motion, just a little bit, and then trying to be very realistic and naturalistic with the anatomy. And the first one we'll look at is the Critias boy. He's only almost 3 feet tall. He doesn't have feet, but there's something important going on here. If we go back to even this, Kroisos, very rigid pose, and around 530, but then we get here 480. Just a few years later, 50 years or so, what happens? Look at it. Look at this hip, this knee. This knee is relaxed. This knee is locked. This hip is down because this knee is unlocked. If that knee unlocks for a person that's standing there, that hip will fall down. This hip is still up. What happens is the spine becomes an S curve and you're showing relaxation. You're not showing a rigid pose anymore. You're just showing relaxation. Okay, right? If the artist can show that, then hey, how about a little bit more? So you have this piece called the Doryphorus, or the Spear Bearer in English, by Polycletus. This is the first time we see an artist who we know because he signed it. Both of these are Roman copies of the original. The original would have been in bronze. Okay, more on that later. But what we see here, what has he done? We have the Critias boy, and this is the contrapposto, that counter pose. So let's go back here. We have the knee that's unlocked, the knee that's locked, a hip that's down, a hip that's up. The curve of the torso, but Polycletus has done something else. This arm is down and relaxed. This leg is relaxed. This arm is cocked and active. This leg is straight. So what you're seeing here is this contrast. One arm straight, one arm bent. One leg straight, one leg bent. The torso, one side is up, one side is down. The face, instead of looking forward, he's looking off, and he's carrying the spear. Okay? And the most important thing is, look right here at the bottom, he's pushing off. So he isn't just standing there like the Critias boy, but he's actually in the very first moment of stepping. That toe is moving against the ground. That heel has been brought up. He's starting to push off right here and to take a step. As he pushes off, he's going to turn this way, and he's already looking that direction. Okay. This is a very famous piece of artwork, and there are dozens and dozens of copies that were made, especially during the Roman Empire. Now, very quickly here, going from archaic to classical, and after the classical, I'm skipping quite a bit here, we have Hellenistic. And very quickly, the Hellenistic is all about emotion. It's beyond realism. It's extravagance of the body, doing things that it really shouldn't. And one of the prime pieces is this. The Laocoon, some people say Loacanon. I've heard it several different ways from art historians. Get back here. And it's about Laocoon dying and pain and death and the ugliness of that, and trying to bring out emotion